The bark echoed through the marble halls of Harrington Global. A black K9 lunged forward, nose to the floor, eyes sharp as blades. "Check everyone." The commander's voice cut through the silence. Among dozens of frozen employees stood Lila, 13 years old, the maid's daughter, her hand rising slightly. A gesture so small, so quick, no one else noticed. The dog stopped, looked at her, then turned toward Richard Harrington, the billionaire, observing from across the room. "What is it?" he asked. Lila whispered, "He just received a signal, sir." A second later, the dog barked loudly, charging straight toward a man in a gray suit. Screams, papers scattering across the floor. And Richard only stared at Lila, his expression completely transformed. Because only this girl understood the language, the dog had been trained in something no one in this room expected. Harrington Global wasn't just a company. It was a fortress of steel and glass, towering over the city like a monument to power. Security and protection, that's what they sold to governments, corporations, kings. Richard Harrington had built an empire on trust. But empires, Lila had learned, were built by people no one ever saw. She lived with her mother Evelyn in the staff quarters behind the main estate. A small apartment with clean walls and a window that faced the garden. Her mother cleaned Richard's office every morning, polished his desk, straightened his files. Invisible work, essential work. Lila didn't mind being invisible. She preferred it. Most afternoons she'd follow her mother up to the executive floor, sit quietly in the corner with a book, and watch Shadow, the retired military K9, who now lived at headquarters. He was a German shepherd, black as midnight, with eyes that missed nothing. She'd learned his language years ago. Her grandfather had been a K9 trainer for the police. Before he passed, he'd taught her the silent commands, the hand signals, the whistle tones, the way you could speak to a dog without ever making a sound. "Words lie, Lila," he used to say. "But signals are truth." Shadow knew those signals, and so did she. Richard Harrington rarely noticed them. To him, staff were part of the system, necessary but background. He moved through the building like a man who owned the air itself. Cold, calculating, untouchable, until one Tuesday afternoon. A VIP client had arrived for a tour. Shadow, still sharp despite retirement, had been brought out as part of the demonstration. But something triggered him. He began barking aggressively near the guest, teeth bared, body tense. The security team panicked. Blake, the head of security, grabbed the leash. "Shadow, down, down." But the dog wouldn't stop. Lila saw it immediately. The tension in his shoulders, the angle of his ears. He wasn't attacking. He was alerting. She stood, walked slowly toward them, and raised 2 fingers to her chest. Then she tapped her palm twice. Shadow stopped instantly. Sat. His eyes locked on hers. The room went silent. Richard, standing 10 feet away, turned to look at her. Really look at her. For the first time. "Who taught you that?" His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "My grandfather, sir. He trained dogs for the police." Richard's expression shifted, something between surprise and respect. He glanced at Shadow, then back at Lila. "What did you just tell him?" "That he did his job. That he could stand down now." The billionaire studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time anyone could remember, Richard Harrington smiled. "Smart girl." Evelyn watched from the doorway, her hands folded, her heart pounding. She'd spent years teaching her daughter to stay small, stay quiet, stay safe. But something had just changed. Richard nodded once, then returned to his meeting. But Lila felt his gaze linger, curious, calculating. She didn't know it yet, but that moment had set something in motion. Because 3 days later, everything would shatter, and the only person who could put it back together would be a 13-year-old girl with a gift no one believed in. Monday morning arrived like a storm. The headlines hit before sunrise. Harrington Global security breach, confidential data leaked to competitors. Richard's office became a war room within the hour. Phones ringing, lawyers pacing, board members demanding answers. The company that promised protection to the world had been compromised from within. Someone had betrayed them. Richard stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back. Below, the city moved on unaware. But inside these walls, everything had stopped. "Lockdown," he ordered. No one leaves. No one enters. I want every inch of this building searched. Blake moved quickly, assembling the team. Police were called. The K9 unit arrived with 3 dogs, but Shadow was brought out too. He knew the building better than anyone. Retired or not, he was still the best. Evelyn received the call at 8 a.m. Report to headquarters. Deep clean required in all executive offices. Lila came with her. She always did on Mondays. By the time they arrived, the building felt different. Tense. Every corridor had security. Every room was being emptied, inspected, photographed. Employees stood in lines, bags checked, phones confiscated. Shadow moved through the halls with his handler nose working, body low. He'd been trained to detect electronics, chemical residue, anything out of place. When they reached the file storage room on the 3rd floor, Shadow stopped. He sniffed the air, circled twice, then barked 3 sharp, deliberate sounds. Blake stepped forward, arms crossed. Probably just cleaning chemicals. We had the floors waxed last week. The handler nodded. Could be residue. Dogs pick up everything. But Lila watched from the doorway, her book forgotten in her hands. 3 barks, not 2. Not a warning bark. 3 meant detection, metal, electronics, something foreign. She stepped closer, her shoes quiet on the tile. Shadow barked again, louder this time, his focus locked on the corner near Blake's personal desk. Blake waved it off. He's confused. There's nothing here. Lila's heart pounded. She glanced at her mother, who stood frozen near the supply cart, fear written across her face. Evelyn shook her head slightly. Stay back, don't get involved. But Lila couldn't. He's not confused. She said, her voice small but clear. Blake turned, irritation flashing across his face. Excuse me. He's not barking at chemicals. He's alerting to electronic equipment. The room went quiet. The handler frowned. Blake's expression darkened. Kid, this isn't a game. Let the professionals handle it. But enough. Then Richard's voice cut through the tension like a blade. If the girl has something to say, let her speak. He'd been standing in the hallway watching. Now he stepped into the room, his gaze moving from Blake to Shadow to Lila. You said he's alerting to equipment, Lila nodded. 3 barks. That's the signal my grandfather taught. It means he's found something metal or electronic that doesn't belong. Blake scoffed. With all due respect, sir, she's a child. She doesn't know how K9 protocols work. Richard didn't look away from Lila. Are you certain? Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. Yes, sir. He studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to the handler. Let the dog work. Blake stiffened. Sir, I really think... Blake. Richard's tone left no room for argument. Step back. The handler released Shadow's leash. The dog moved immediately, nose to the ground, weaving between desks and filing cabinets. Lila watched him carefully. She knew what he was doing, narrowing the scent, isolating the source. He stopped at Blake's desk, circled it once, twice. Then he sat. The final signal. Target located. Lila's breath caught. Richard walked forward slowly. Open it. Blake's face drained of color. Sir, that's my personal workspace. Open it. The handler pulled open the lower drawer. Inside, beneath a stack of folders and a box of tissues, was a small black device no bigger than a matchbox. A red light blinked faintly on its side. Audio recorder. High grade. Military spec. No one spoke. Blake's mouth opened, but no words came out. Richard's eyes went cold. Explain. I didn't, sir, I swear. You swear what? That you didn't plant a surveillance device in your own desk, that you didn't sell us out? Blake stumbled back, hands raised. I was pressured. They threatened my family. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. Richard gestured to the officers. They moved quickly, cuffing Blake's wrists as he stammered excuses, apologies, justifications. Shadow barked once more, soft, satisfied. Job complete. And Richard turned to Lila. She stood perfectly still, her small frame framed by the doorway, her mother's hand now resting protectively on her shoulder. You said he understands hand signals, Richard said quietly. Yes, sir. But today he didn't need them. Lila hesitated. Then she said, today he just listened to his heart. Something shifted in Richard's expression. Not a smile, not yet, but something softer, something human. "Thank you," he said, and in that moment, everything changed. The room cleared slowly. Officers led Blake away, his protests fading down the corridor. The device was bagged, catalogued, marked as evidence. Employees whispered in clusters, shock rippling through the building like aftershocks. But Richard didn't move. He stood near the desk, staring at the empty drawer, his mind clearly racing. How long had Blake been compromised? What else had been leaked? Who else was involved? Shadow remained seated near Lila, his breathing steady, his posture calm. The tension had left his body. He'd done what he was trained to do. Lila knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his head. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did so good." Richard turned to her. "How did you know?" She looked up, surprised by the directness of his question. "Sir, how did you know what his barks meant?" The handler didn't catch it. Blake didn't catch it. "But you did." Lila stood slowly, her fingers still brushing Shadow's fur. "My grandfather used to say that dogs don't lie. They tell you everything if you know how to listen. And you know how to listen. He taught me, before he died." Richard's expression softened just slightly. "What else did he teach you?" Lila hesitated. Her mother stood a few feet away, watching nervously, unsure whether to intervene. But Richard's gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was curious, almost gentle. "He taught me the silent commands," Lila said. "The ones they use in the field when noise could get someone killed. Hand signals, gestures, tones only the dogs can hear." "Show me." Evelyn stepped forward. "Sir, she's just a child." "I'm not asking her to do anything dangerous," Richard said calmly. "I'm asking her to teach me something I clearly don't know." He looked at Lila again. "Will you?" Lila glanced at her mother, who gave a reluctant nod. Then she turned back to Shadow. "Okay," she said softly. "Watch." She raised her right hand palm, flat fingers together. Shadow's eyes locked onto her immediately. She held the position for 2 seconds. Then she lowered her hand slowly, bending at the wrist. Shadow lay down. Richard's eyebrows rose. "That's down," Lila explained. "But if I do this?" She raised 2 fingers in a V shape, then tapped her shoulder twice. Shadow stood instantly alert, ears forward. "That's ready. It means something's about to happen. And if there's danger—" Lila's expression grew serious. She formed a fist with her right hand, then extended her index finger sharply toward the ground. Shadow's entire demeanor changed. His body lowered, his focus sharpened. He became a weapon, controlled but ready. Richard exhaled slowly. "That's remarkable." "It's trust," Lila said simply. "He trusts me because I speak his language, and I trust him because he never lies." Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Could you have stopped him earlier when he was barking at Blake's desk?" Lila nodded. "Yes, sir. But you didn't. Because he was right, and someone needed to listen." The weight of her words settled over the room like a blanket. Richard looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw not just the maid's daughter, but someone with a gift. Someone with courage. "You took a risk," he said. "Speaking up like that. Blake could have had you removed. I could have ignored you." "I know." "Then why did you do it?" Lila thought for a moment, her hand still resting on Shadow's back. "Because staying quiet felt worse than being wrong." Richard's jaw tightened. He turned away, facing the window, his hands in his pockets. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, millions of people, millions of voices, most of them unheard. "I built this company on certainty," he said quietly. "On control. On knowing every variable, every outcome." He paused. "But today, a 13-year-old girl saw something I missed, and a dog I thought was past his prime saved everything I built." He turned back to her. "Do you know what that tells me?" Lila shook her head. "It tells me I've been looking in the wrong places." Evelyn stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, we should go. Lila's missed enough school already. I want to hire her." The words hung in the air like thunder. Evelyn blinked. I'm sorry. Not full-time, Richard clarified, but as a consultant. For the K9 program we're developing. We're integrating dogs into our security operations globally, but we've been struggling with inconsistent training protocols. If Lila understands the silent command system, she could help us standardize it. He looked at Lila. Would you be interested? Lila's heart pounded. I don't know if I'm qualified. You just caught a traitor no one else could find. I'd say you're more than qualified. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, pride, fear, disbelief all at once. Sir, that's incredibly generous, but… Think about it, Richard said. No pressure, but the offer stands. He walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Lila looked up. Thank you, he said, for trusting yourself when no one else did. And then he was gone. Shadow nudged Lila's hand with his nose. She looked down at him, her chest tight with emotion. Did that just happen? She whispered. Evelyn pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Yes, baby. It did. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside that room, something extraordinary had been born, not just an opportunity, but a connection. Between a man who'd built walls to protect himself, and a girl who'd learned that the strongest walls were the ones you didn't need. The news spread like wildfire. By Tuesday afternoon, every major outlet had picked up the story, Harrington Global insider threat exposed by Maid's daughter and retired K9. Reporters camped outside the building, cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward anyone who walked through the doors. But Lila wasn't there. She'd gone back to school, back to her normal life, or what was left of it. Her classmates stared, teachers whispered. By lunch, her phone had 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Evelyn kept her close that week, declining every interview request, every media appearance. You're not a spectacle, she told her daughter firmly. You're a child. And you're my child. But Richard didn't forget. Friday evening, a black car arrived at their apartment. The driver handed Evelyn an envelope, cream-colored, embossed with the Harrington logo. Inside was an invitation. Dinner, tomorrow night. Just the three of us. Evelyn's hands shook as she read it. Lila looked over her shoulder, her stomach flipping. Do we have to go? She asked quietly. No, Evelyn said. But I think we should. The restaurant was intimate. A private room with soft lighting, a table set for three, and a view of the city that made everything below look small and distant. Richard arrived on time, dressed casually, no suit, no tie. Just a man trying to shed the armor he wore every day. He stood when they entered. Thank you for coming. Evelyn nodded, her posture guarded. Lila stayed close to her mother's side. They sat. Ordered. The first few minutes passed in polite, careful conversation. Weather, traffic, the food. Then Richard set down his fork. I need to apologize. Evelyn looked up surprised. I've worked with your mother for 6 years, Richard said, looking at Lila. And until this week, I didn't know your name. I didn't know you existed beyond Evelyn's daughter. I didn't know what you were capable of. Lila shifted in her seat. You didn't need to know, sir. I was just… background. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. That's what I told myself. That people like you and your mother were background. Essential, yes. But not… visible. He paused, his jaw tightening. I was wrong. Evelyn's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Richard continued. You weren't afraid to speak up when everyone else stayed silent. You trusted what you knew even when you were the only one who believed it. He looked directly at Lila. That takes more courage than most adults have. I was scared, Lila admitted, the whole time. But you did it anyway. Because staying quiet felt worse. Richard smiled, small but real. You said that before, and I can't stop thinking about it. He leaned back. Do you know what I've built my entire career on? Lila shook her head. Control, strategy, making sure I'm always 3 steps ahead. He exhaled. But I've also built it on silence, on people being too afraid to speak up. On assuming that if no one's complaining, everything's fine. He looked down at his hands. Blake worked for me for 12 years. 12 years. And I never saw it. Because I never really looked. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of the city below. After you left on Monday, Richard said, I had the entire security team reviewed. We found 2 more people who'd been compromised, not as deep as Blake, but enough to cause damage. They confessed within hours. Evelyn gasped softly. They said they thought no one would believe them if they came forward. That they'd be fired for even suggesting something was wrong. Richard's voice hardened. I created that culture. I built a company where people were too scared to tell the truth. He looked at Lila again. And then a 13-year-old showed me what real bravery looks like. Lila felt her throat tighten. I just listened to the dog, sir. No, Richard said firmly. You listen to yourself. That's much harder. Evelyn reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. Richard straightened. Which is why I'm doing 2 things. First, I'm implementing a new reporting system anonymous direct to an external ethics board. No one should ever feel like they can't speak up. And second, Evelyn asked, I'm starting a scholarship fund. Truth and Loyalty. For children of service workers, housekeepers, drivers, maintenance staff, anyone whose parents keep this world running but never get credit for it. Kids with talent. Kids with gifts no one's noticed yet. He slid a folder across the table. Lila, you're the first recipient. Full tuition to any school you want. Any program. Any future you choose. Lila stared at the folder, her hands frozen. Sir, I can't. You already earned it, Richard said. You just didn't know you were being tested. Tears slipped down Evelyn's cheeks. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Lila looked at her mother, then at Richard. Why are you doing this? Richard's smile was sad. Because you reminded me what I'd forgotten. That loyalty isn't about following orders. It's about protecting what's right even when it costs you something. He stood, extending his hand toward Lila. She stood too, her small hand disappearing into his. Thank you, he said, for being braver than I was. And in that moment, Lila understood something her grandfather had once told her. The strongest voices aren't the loudest. They're the ones that speak when silence is easier. Outside the city glittered under the night sky millions of lights, millions of lives, most of them invisible. But tonight, one of those lives had been seen. And nothing would ever be the same. 1 month later, the invitations went out. Harrington Global's 20th anniversary gala. Black tie. 500 guests. CEOs, politicians, celebrities, the kind of people whose handshakes moved markets. Evelyn received hers in the morning mail. She stared at it for a full minute, reading the embossed lettering over and over. You and Lila are cordially invited. We can't go to this, she whispered. But Lila, sitting at the breakfast table with her homework spread out, looked up. Why not? Because this isn't our world, baby. It wasn't, Lila said quietly. But maybe it is now. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to protect her daughter from disappointment, from feeling out of place, from the weight of eyes that judged before they understood. But when she looked at Lila, calm, steady, unafraid, she realized her daughter had already walked through fire. A gala was nothing compared to that. The night arrived cold and clear. The venue was a historic estate on the edge of the city, its gardens lit with thousands of tiny lights, its ballroom glowing like a jewel box. Valets parked Bentleys and Maseratis. Women in gowns floated up the steps. Men in tailored suits talked deals before they'd even reached the bar. Evelyn and Lila arrived in a company car. Evelyn wore a simple navy dress she'd borrowed from a friend. Lila wore something she'd picked herself, a modest gray dress, her hair pulled back, her shoes practical. She looked exactly like who she was, and she didn't apologize for it. Shadow walked beside her. Richard had arranged it, no service dog vest, no official designation. Just a companion. A friend. When they entered, heads turned. Not because Lila looked glamorous, but because people recognized her. From the news. From the headlines. From the story that had shaken the entire company. Whispers followed them through the hall. That's her. The girl with the dog. Can you believe she's only 13? Evelyn's hand tightened on Lila's shoulder. But Lila kept walking, her head high, Shadow's steady presence grounding her. They found their seats near the front, close to the stage. Too close, Evelyn thought. But Lila just smiled. He wants us to be seen, she said. That's what I'm afraid of. The evening moved through courses, speeches, toasts. Richard took the stage, halfway through his presence, commanding as always. He talked about the company's journey, the challenges, the victories, the vision for the next 20 years. Then he paused. But this year, he said, his voice shifting, we learned something more important than strategy or profit. The room quieted. We learned that integrity doesn't come from the top down. It comes from anyone brave enough to stand up when others look away. He scanned the crowd. His eyes found Lila. A month ago, this company was compromised from within. We were losing data, losing trust, losing everything we'd built. And the person who stopped it wasn't a board member or a security chief. He stepped away from the podium, walking toward the edge of the stage. It was a 13-year-old girl who understood something the rest of us had forgotten. That loyalty isn't about silence. It's about truth. Murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Lila Carter. Richard's voice was calm, clear. Would you come up here, please? Evelyn's breath caught. Lila's eyes went wide. You don't have to, her mother whispered. But Lila was already standing. Shadow walked beside her as she moved through the tables, past the stairs, past the whispers. The room seemed to hold its breath. When she reached the stage, Richard extended his hand. She took it and he helped her up. The applause started small, polite, uncertain. Then someone stood. Then another. Then the entire room. A standing ovation. Not for glamour or wealth or status, but for courage. Richard didn't hand her a trophy, didn't give a long speech. He simply stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, and let the moment speak for itself. When the applause finally faded, he leaned down and said something only she could hear. You changed me. Thank you. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. You listened. That's all I needed. He nodded. Then he looked out at the crowd. This is what we're building toward. Not just a company, but a place where every voice matters, where courage is rewarded, where the truth is never punished. He paused. And if a 13-year-old can show us the way, then we have no excuse not to follow. The room erupted again, not just applause, but something deeper. Recognition. Respect. Lila stepped back, her heart pounding, her legs shaking. But Shadow pressed against her side, steady and warm. And when she returned to her seat, her mother pulled her close, tears streaming down her face. I'm so proud of you, Evelyn whispered. I didn't do anything special, Mom. You did the hardest thing in the world, baby. You told the truth when everyone else was too afraid. Across the room, Richard watched them. Not as an employer. Not as a billionaire, but as a man who'd been reminded what mattered. And for the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. The campus stretched across rolling hills, its buildings a blend of old stone and modern glass. Students hurried between classes, backpacks slung over shoulders, conversations buzzing with energy and possibility. Lila walked among them, her laptop bag crossing her chest, Shadow, older, now grayer, around the muzzle padding, faithfully beside her. The Technology and Innovation Academy, full scholarship, focus on AI development and animal behavioral science. A year ago, she'd been sitting in her mother's small apartment wondering if speaking up had been a mistake. Now she was building the future. Her phone buzzed. A message from Richard. Are you free this afternoon? I'd like to show you something. She smiled, typing back quickly. I have lab until 3. After that, I'm yours. He arrived at exactly 3:15, stepping out of a modest sedan, no driver, no entourage. Just Richard Harrington wearing jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. You drove yourself? Lila asked, raising an eyebrow. Trying something new, he said with a slight grin. Turns out I remember how. They walked across campus together, Shadow between them. Other students glanced over, some recognizing Richard, others just seeing a girl and her dog walking with an older man who looked kind. "How's the program?" Richard asked. "Challenging, amazing, sometimes terrifying," Lila admitted. "But I love it." "Good. That means you're exactly where you should be." They reached a bench overlooking the quad. Richard pulled out a tablet, swiping through a presentation. "I wanted to show you this before we launch it publicly," he said. "It's the new canine response system we've been developing." Lila leaned in, her eyes scanning the diagrams. Dynamic signal integration, real-time behavioral analysis, AI-assisted training protocols. "This is incredible," she breathed. "We're calling it the Shadow Protocol," Richard said. "Named after the dog who started it all." Shadow's ears perked up at his name. Lila smiled, scratching behind them. "But here's the thing," Richard continued. "We need someone to lead the field testing. Someone who understands both the technology and the animals. Someone who can bridge the gap between what we build and what actually works." He looked at her directly. "I want it to be you." Lila blinked. "Sir, I'm still in school. Part-time. Summers. Whenever you can. No pressure on grades, no interference with your education. But your insight would be invaluable." She stared at the tablet, her mind racing. "I never thought one hand signal could lead to all this." "You didn't just give a hand signal," Richard said gently. "You gave the world a signal that honesty still matters, that courage still wins, that truth still has a voice." He closed the tablet. Everything else just followed from that. Lila looked out over the campus, students laughing, studying, dreaming their futures into existence. A year ago, she'd been invisible, background noise in someone else's empire. Now she was building her own. "I'll do it," she said. "On one condition." "Name it." "Shadow gets to be part of every test. He earned this more than anyone." Richard laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. "Deal." Shadow barked once, as if sealing the agreement. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon sun paint the buildings gold. Two people from different worlds, connected by a moment of truth that had changed everything. "Thank you," Lila said softly, "for believing in me." "Thank you," Richard replied, "for believing in yourself first." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by students rushing toward their futures, Lila understood something profound. Heroes didn't need capes or titles or wealth. They just needed the courage to speak when silence was easier, and the wisdom to listen when someone else did the same. Morning light filtered through the window of the small apartment, softer now, warmer. Evelyn poured tea at the kitchen table, the familiar ritual grounding her after a year of extraordinary change. Across from her, Lila sat with her laptop open, typing an email. "What are you working on?" her mother asked. "A letter. To Mr. Harrington." "Another report?" "No." Lila smiled. "A thank you." She read aloud as she typed, "Dear Mr. Harrington. Thank you for believing in a child and a dog when no one else did. Thank you for showing me that speaking up doesn't make you small, it makes you real. And thank you for reminding me that the greatest gift we can give each other is simply to listen." Shadow lay at her feet, his head resting on her shoe, his breathing slow and peaceful. He was older now, content to sleep more than patrol. But his eyes still held that spark, the one that said he'd rise again if needed. Lila reached down, scratching behind his ears. "You're the real hero here, you know." He huffed softly, tail thumping once against the floor. "He knows," Evelyn said, smiling through tears she didn't bother hiding anymore. Outside, the city moved on, traffic, voices, life rushing forward like it always did. But inside this small apartment, with sunlight streaming across the worn table and a dog dreaming at her feet, Lila felt something she'd never expected. Not fame, not wealth, not validation from strangers. Just peace. The quiet, unshakable peace of knowing she'd done the right thing when it mattered most, and that she thought was worth more than any empire. Lila and Shadow's story reminds us of something we too often forget. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a small gesture made at exactly the right moment. Loyalty isn't about blind obedience, it's about protecting what's right, even when no one believes you. And true trust doesn't come from power or position. It comes from a child brave enough to look at the truth and refuse to turn away. In this noisy world, there are still people who choose to do the right thing, quietly, steadily, without expecting applause. That's why Maid's Daughter stories exist, to share emotional stories that touch hearts, real-life stories that inspire compassion, and moments where truth triumphs over silence. These are the stories that remind us even the smallest voice can change everything. If this story made you believe that honesty always finds its voice, comment, "I choose honesty." And don't forget to subscribe to Maid's Daughter stories, where small hearts create great change.